All right, welcome to the podcast, everybody. Episode 51, I'm going to assume. Again, this is a podcast, so the only thing on the screen is going to be a shifting visual backdrop. New listener or old, if anybody wants to support the podcast and everything, or just help me keep going IRL, then links to both PayPal and Patreon are down in the description below, as well as in the top pinned comment. The amount you give doesn't matter, anything is enormously helpful. Now, as the title suggests, yes, U.S. natural gas production is down by nearly 10% from, I believe it was December, or it might have been early January, but I'm pretty sure it was late December, so several months back, when U.S. natural gas production peaked for the second time after peaking for the first time conventionally decades back. But it hit a peak of over 109 billion cubic feet per day back in December or January, and then gradually began to decline even before all the massive losses and the price collapses and everything brought about by this year's current situation. So just note, this isn't just because of what's been happening this year. It was already declining before that, sort of like Oklahoma's rig count. But what eventually began taking place this year, and the fallout from that, obviously then worsened things and accelerated it. But U.S. natural gas production was already declining after hitting a high of 109 or over 109 billion cubic feet per day. And as of this past week's data, it was down to a flat 100 billion cubic feet per day. And since the active drilling rig count is still dropping, it is likely going to keep declining and going into the 90s. So the big question lurking there obviously is, minus what has happened this year, is that 109 going to end up being the U.S.'s second overall natural gas production peak, the terminal end of the shale-induced rebound? I think there's a chance it might be, and I was kind of 50-50 at first, but I'm starting to lean more in favor that it probably is, as the production recovery from all of this isn't exactly going to materialize all that fast, let alone materialize basically instantaneously like numerous shale drillers were claiming it was going to. As you remember back at the end of May, start of June, many in the shale industry were saying that all the lost production would be restored by the end of July. Well, the end of July has come and gone. It's been 10 days or so now, 9 days since the end of July. And natural gas and oil both, all that lost production, you can't actually see, but I'm kind of looking around. Even look up at the ceiling. Yeah, I don't see it anywhere. It's still gone. Oop, forgot to check behind me. Hold on. Nope, it ain't there either. It's still missing. Now, I have no doubt a fair amount of it is going to be restored, but it's going to take a little bit longer, and it kind of, since you know how shale works, it's going to require a huge resurgence in the number of active drilling rigs, which is not yet happening, because one, oil is not yet above the $55 per barrel minimum that most shale needs to actually break even, and not even yet above the $45 per barrel minimum at which their investors and debt financiers are willing to start giving them free money to go ahead and drill anyways. It's gotten pretty close. Oil got up to $43 per barrel this past week, and at present is fluctuating between 41 and 43. So when it goes back over 45 and starts staying over 45, I think that should be the point where the U.S. drilling rig count, at least, will stop declining, most likely. And I don't think it will immediately start just jumping up from there, but once it then gets just a little further, once the price goes over 50, then I think that's when the rebound is going to come. But for the moment, yeah, it's still declining, both the drilling rig count and oil and gas production along with it, because Those things are kind of tied to each other, obviously. So U.S. natural gas production down to 100 billion cubic feet per day. And going through the other numbers, then, U.S. natural gas consumption over the course of this past week averaged a bit lower than the previous week, 85.3 billion cubic feet per day, with the individual numbers within that being heating demand only 8.2, as obviously it's the middle of the summer. Consumption by natural gas-fired power plants still over 40 at 40.1. U.S. natural gas exports on LNG tankers up to 3.8, still massively down from the 9 that it had gotten up to before all this began. And consumption by the pipelines for its own pumping system fuel at 6.8. U.S. natural gas storage inventories currently up to 3.27 trillion cubic feet in storage. Compared to normally at this time of year, they would still only be down at 2.84. And last year, which had been a very high demand winter year, they were still all the way down to 2.67. And natural gas prices began taking a decent recovery, and this past week they jumped back up over $2 per thousand cubic feet, a price they have not been at for months. And as of last checking before recording this, they were up around $2.20 per thousand cubic feet. Now, with regards to that drilling rig count, the U.S. drilling rig count is still dropping. It stalled for a week, but then it just started going down again. So it dropped from 251 actively drilling rigs, now down to 247, and that's compared, of course, to the roughly 800 actively drilling rigs that were online in the U.S. before all this began in February or March. And among the individual states, the counts are Texas, still at 104, down from the 400 they were at before this began. Oklahoma, still at 11. New Mexico, dropping some more, down to 46, down from about 110 before all this began. North Dakota, still at 11, a long cry down from their former lower 50s. West Virginia, down at 5. Pennsylvania, currently still at 20. Louisiana, at 29. Ohio, at 6. Colorado, at 5. Utah, still at 0. And Wyoming, previously, as we said, had come back up from 0. They're back up to a whole 1 actively drilling rig. And just to the north of the U.S., Canada actually has already been going on its rebound for a number of weeks now. Before everything began and fell apart, they had been at 133 actively drilling rigs in the country, and at the absolute bottom, they fell all the way down to only 13 actively drilling rigs. However, over the past several weeks, they've now climbed all the way back up to 47. And the international drilling rig count updated. So excluding the US and Canada, the global actively drilling rig count continues to decline and is now down to 743. And that's compared to the global total, excluding the US and Canada, was at about 1,000 actively drilling rigs before all this began and fell apart. And the continents and regions as they go are Africa, still dropping, now down to only 56 rigs. Latin America, the only region that is recovering, up to 74 rigs now. Europe, still dropping, now down to 105. Asia and Oceania, so Asia plus, Indonesia and Australia and the islands and everything, still dropping as well, now down to 193. And the Middle East continues dropping by decent amounts as well, now all the way down to 315. And we have a few rare earth updates to run through. Among the rare earth metals, we had numerous price increases this past week. Dysprosium, one of the magnetic rare earths needed in electric motors of all sizes and wind turbines, as well as the magnetic nanograins in computer hard drives. Dysprosium, after dropping a bit, climbed back up to just under $351 per kilogram. Neodymium continues climbing, up to now $60 per kilogram again. Neodymium being the primary critical rare earth needed in electric motors and wind turbines. And terbium, a rarer rare earth metal, also needed in electric motors and wind turbines, and in computer hard drive solid-state devices. Terbium continues climbing, now up to $773 per kilogram. And to round everything out with water levels, Lake Mead, the big one, the reservoir at the bottom of Nevada, water source for the 3 million people of the Las Vegas area, and technically water source for most of Southern California and the 12+ million people of the Los Angeles area. Since the two reservoirs on the border of California and Arizona that water is pumped hundreds of miles from to supply the Los Angeles area, they're downstream from Lake Mead, and the way they work that system is if their levels start dropping even in the slightest bit, then Lake Mead releases water downstream. It increases the outflow so that those reservoirs, the ones supplying Los Angeles and Southern California, they get refilled and kept stable at about the same rate. Lake Mead has reached the usual time in the year where the amount of snowmelt running off the Rockies sort of stabilizes it. So it stopped dropping steeply. It's dropped over the last week from 1,084.5 elevation feet down to 1,084.3. And again, the way the U.S. Lake System measures it is by elevation feet. So it's not 1,080-something feet deep. It's the top of the water is that high above sea level. In reality, if Lake Mead were full, it would be at 1,229 feet. And if it were empty, the bottom of Lake Mead is at about 915. For the New York City area, they're supplied by a number of reservoirs in upper New York State, and collectively their combined total is about 85.6% full at the moment. They were on the decline, but they got bumped back up a little bit by all the rain they got from the hurricane, or rather the tropical storm. And that's in comparison to, normally at this time of year, they would still be up a little bit higher at 88.7. For the Phoenix, Arizona area, massive city in the middle of a desert, Phoenix is supplied by numerous reservoirs in the surrounding region, and their collective total is presently 88% full, which is better than they were last year. Last year at this time, they were down at only 73% full. Cape Town, South Africa, the city that everyone remembers was about to run out of water a couple of years back. Well, they've regained a lot of that water, and their collective reservoir system is presently just under 78% full, which is about the same as last week, and which is much better than 0%. And the reservoir system supplying water to the Sydney, Australia area is presently at 89.9% full, collectively at least, which is much better than last year. Right at this time last year, the Sydney area's combined reservoir collective total was way down at 51.5. And that's it for this one. Thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Please like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, watch all of the other stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of episodes and a lot of actual videos, in quotation marks, from before the podcast. But if you want to support everything, if you want to help me out, PayPal and Patreon are in the description and in the top end comment. No matter what happens to me in one way or another, may God bless you all, and I will see you all around next time.